Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be discussing everything about Whitemane. The focus of this video is to kind of educate you on how to play Whitemane, and I'll be introducing a Whitemane build that I like to play. So in this video we're going to go over Whitemane's basic abilities and her kit, and I think that's the most important part of getting to understand Whitemane. Her kit is really convoluted and it takes time to understand it, and I think that's the reason Whitemane has such a high skill floor. It's really hard getting into her, so yeah, I'll discuss how to view her talents and abilities and how they play into each other. And after that I'll introduce my Whitemane build, and there's two versions of it. There's version 1 and version 2, and I'll introduce both to you guys in this video. So yeah, hopefully this video helps, and if you're still confused or if you have any questions, feel free to comment it. I think I respond to most people's questions or whatever. So yeah, and if it helps, you could take a look at my other videos. I have a video dedicated to just Whitemane's rotation and mana management, and I have another video going over a Whitemane gameplay in a Master GM game. So yeah, so hopefully this video helps, and let's get started. So to begin with Whitemane, I want to first talk about her gameplay style and her kit and the mindset I have when I play Whitemane. And then we'll talk about Whitemane's kit and some of the complexities involved in it, which will include her Zeal and the Desperation Debuff. And then we'll go through her talents together, and I'll introduce my direct healing build and my indirect healing build. So when thinking about the way Whitemane heals, one of the most defining features of her kit is her ability to do healing through damage. She's able to do this through her passive, which is Zeal. So Zeal is a buff that Whitemane can cast on targets to allow all of her damage to be transferred as heals. So this type of healing I like to refer to as indirect heals. So when Whitemane deals damage through her auto attacks, Inquisition, Searing Lash, Divine Reckoning, her damaging abilities, anytime that this is transferred as heals through Zeal, I refer to this as indirect heals. And on the other hand, Whitemane also has direct heals, which would be her Desperate Plea, her Clemency, and her Scarlet Aegis. So something unique about her direct heals is that these are the only abilities that apply the Zeal buff. So you have to cast some form of direct heals before you can do any indirect heals. So if you're just dealing damage and there's no Zeal buffs active, nothing is being transferred as heals. So you have to make sure that you at least have Zeals active before you start damaging and expect heals to come out of it. So another function of the direct healing abilities, that would be Clemency and Desperate Plea, is their ability to just do direct heals. So sometimes you might use these abilities to just apply Zeal, like just casting Clemency and then instantly canceling it to just apply Zeal. But other times you might choose to continue casting your Clemency to provide healing. So essentially the main takeaway is your direct heals have two functions. They can either be used to apply Zeal or they can be used to heal. And the main takeaway for indirect heals is that it's Inquisition, Searing Lash, and auto attacks. And these abilities cannot heal unless there is a Zeal buff active. So at this point you can see that there are many moving parts to Whitemane's kit, and a lot of her abilities are very dynamic and fluid and will be used differently based on the situation at hand. So just having all this information in mind is really helpful for when you're actually playing, and you'll be able to make the decisions that are needed for that moment. And I hope that the direct healing and indirect healing distinction helps moving forward. And now we'll continue on to talk about her next mechanic. So now this brings us to our next point, and the next most confusing thing about Whitemane's kit, which would be her Desperation Debuff. So the reason we're going to talk about this next is because one of the common ways that you're going to apply Zeal is through Desperate Plea. So unlike other healers that have to wait a fixed amount of time before they can cast their healing abilities, Whitemane's Desperate Plea doesn't have a fixed cooldown. So instead of a cooldown, Whitemane has to deal with a debuff known as Desperation. So Desperation is a stacking mana debuff that is attached to Desperate Plea. So what this debuff is trying to do is disincentivizing you from spamming your plea despite it being on a low cooldown. So at this point, I'll just share this graph I made about the Desperation debuff stacks. So with this graph, there's the mana cost, the cumulative mana cost, and the Desperation debuff stacks. So when you cast your first plea, it costs 40 mana. So for every subsequent plea that you cast, you rack up another stack of Desperation. So this further increases the mana cost of your Desperation, which is essentially going to tank your mana pool. So for every additional stack of Desperation that you accumulate, it increases the mana cost of your next plea by 40. So as you can see with this graph and this video, you'll be by like your 4th plea. So at this point, I'll share how we're going to stay mana efficient and deal with this Desperation debuff. To deal with Whitemane's Desperation debuff, we're going to go back to Whitemane's basic abilities. And at this point, we're going to talk about Whitemane's Inquisition and Clemency. So first, I'll briefly explain what these abilities do, and then I'll explain how they're going to help us stay mana efficient. So Inquisition is a damage dealing ability. It does a 30% slow on enemies, and Whitemane has to stand still to cast this ability. But Inquisition also removes a stack of Desperation. And then Whitemane has Clemency, and this is a direct healing ability. So similar to Inquisition, Clemency is a beam that Whitemane casts on allies. Whitemane has to stand still while channeling this ability, and it applies a stack of Zeal. And both Inquisition and Clemency, they both remove a stack of Desperation, but they also share a cooldown. So when Whitemane is trying to heal or deal damage through direct heals or indirect heals, it's important to break up her Desperate Plea spams with either weaving in an Inquisition or a Clemency. And another option is to just simply wait for the Desperation debuff to time out. And in that time, you should try your best to safely weave in as many autos as you can, and landing as many Searing Lashes as well. So at this point, I'll just give a brief overview of Searing Lash, and then we'll talk about Whitemane's auto attacks. So Whitemane's Searing Lash is a skill shot that Whitemane can land on enemies, and if it lands, it casts again automatically, I think perpendicularly, I don't know, but it makes like a cross type shape. And basically you want to try landing these on enemies as much as possible because it deals a lot of damage, and this transfers as a lot of healing through indirect heals. So yeah, landing Searing Lash is really important because there's also other talents that get impacted based on your ability to land Searing Lash. So yeah, it's a pretty straightforward ability. It deals damage, it's a skill shot, and you get rewarded if it lands, and there's talents that synergize with it. So now we're going to talk about Whitemane's auto attacks in respect to her plea, and maybe giving you some assurance of not panicking and spamming Desperate Plea, and giving you a greater relative understanding of how much damage auto attacks do in respect to how much heals plea does. So I made a graph to kind of illustrate the significance of auto attacking, and to kind of give a relative picture of how much healing you can do with your baseline auto attacks in comparison to your baseline plea. So in this graph, I just posted her Whitemane's baseline auto attack damage from levels 1 through 20, as well as her Desperate Plea. And what this graph found was that for every 2.3 autos you do, it translates to 1 baseline plea. So as we can see from this graph, it really doesn't take that many auto attacks to translate as 1 baseline plea. However, it's really important to remember that these are baseline values. So there's certain talents that you can take to make your auto attacks deal more damage, and there's certain talents that you can take to make your plea heal harder. So another way to deal with Whitemane's mana pool is actually just utilizing her autos. So there's some abilities that Whitemane has that cost no mana, like Inquisition, Searing Lash, and both of her alts, as well as Clemency. So you'd cast Clemency and then do your indirect heals, so that would be your Searing Lash, your Inquisition, and your autos. So if you're just trying to skirmish and you're trying to just heal an ally up, you can do it with virtually no mana. So now we'll finish up talking about the rest of Whitemane's abilities. So with Whitemane's Zeal, there's actually an active portion to it as well. So when you press D, you also get 25% spell power for the cost of 15 armor. So this is pretty handy in situations where you need to increase your healing. So Zeal can be used in a variety of ways. One of the most common ways to use it is pairing it with your Scarlet Aegis if you take this alt. This is a great combo because Zeal takes away 15 armor from Whitemane, and Scarlet Aegis provides 40 armor. So with this combo, you'll still be up 25 armor, and your ult will heal for a lot more due to the 25% bonus spell power. So now we're finally ready to look at Whitemane's talents. So with my Whitemane, I play two builds. One is called the Direct Healing build, which I recommend to beginners or people getting familiar with Whitemane. And then I have the Indirect Healing build with a focus around auto attacks and Searing Lash. So just as a disclaimer, I'm going to be picking and talking about talents to use for my direct and indirect healing builds. If I don't pick a talent, that doesn't necessarily mean that the talent is bad. It just means that there was a better talent to take for the build that I'm presenting. So yeah, just keep that in mind when we go through the talents. Nearly all of Whitemane's talents can be viable, and there's a variety of different ways you can play Whitemane. But again, for this video, we're just going to focus on the direct healing build and the indirect healing build. So at level 1 for both builds, we're going to select Pity the Frail as our talent. What this talent does is it reduces the cooldown of both your Clemency and Inquisition by 1.5 seconds, based on the number of enemies hit by Searing Lash. And the second part of Pity the Frail is increasing Whitemane's healing by 25% when she heals allies or herself that are below 30% HP. So as it pertains to reducing the cooldown of both Inquisition and Clemency, this is really good because both of these abilities are multifaceted and provide Whitemane with a lot of decisions and options. Clemency can be utilized to do direct heals or applying Zeal. Inquisition can be a form of indirect heals through the damage. And both Inquisition and Clemency remove a stack of Desperation as well. So by having these abilities up more often, it allows Whitemane to do her rotation more smoothly and gives her higher uptime for damage through Inquisition or heals through Clemency. And again, it's another way to apply Zeal through Clemency. So having these two spells up, it gives you a lot more flexibility with your rotation and makes it a lot smoother. As for the second part of Pity the Frail, having the bonus 25% healing when healing an ally or yourself below 30% is huge. Whitemane's kit revolves around being a burst healer. She's not a sustain healer like Malfurion or Lucio or Brightwing. She's a burst healer, so there's windows where Whitemane heals and there's windows where she doesn't heal. So Pity the Frail really takes advantage of the windows where Whitemane can do her burst healing, and typically burst healing will be done when an ally is low. So when you tie this into healing an ally below 30%, they have that 25% bonus heals coming from Whitemane. So that's my reasoning for why I take Pity the Frail for both builds at level 1. Moving on to level 4, for the direct healing build, I take Martyrdom, and for the indirect healing build, I take Unwavering Faith. So now I'm going to explain what both of these talents do, and then I'll explain when I take them. So with Martyrdom, it is basically a talent that empowers your plea, and Unwavering Faith is a talent that empowers your autos. So we'll begin with Martyrdom first. So Martyrdom increases your plea, which is great for a playstyle that increases Whitemane's healing when healing outside of combat. So again, this would be empowering your direct healing methods in the form of Desperate Plea. So to fully understand this talent, I thought it'd be helpful to first look at this graph. In this graph, we're just looking at Whitemane's Desperate Plea, and this is the default, like the baseline healing. In the first column, we have the levels 1 through 25, and in the next column, it's the corresponding healing value from plea. And then in the third column, it's Whitemane's total HP. And then from there, I calculated how much of a heal does a baseline plea do for Whitemane's total healing. So at level 1 with no talents, plea heals Whitemane for 10% of her own HP. And this is just a way to relatively understand your heals and how much they do. And now I'm going to post a second graph and we can look at how much more Whitemane heals with Martyrdom. And the way we want to read this is from values 1 through 3, they're blank because we're not level 4, so we don't have the talent yet. But for the first column, it's again the level and then the baseline healing you get from this talent. So as a baseline with Martyrdom, your Desperate Plea heals for 30% more. So that's just the baseline you get by selecting this talent. And then your plea heals for additional 10% based on the amount of Zeals active. So now we can look at this chart and kind of understand what's going on. So again, the first column is the levels. The second column is Martyrdom's baseline healing with a 30% increase. And now the third column would be imagining if you have 1 Zeal active, how much more your plea would heal, and then so on and so forth. So if you have 2 stacks of Zeal, or 3 stacks of Zeal, or 4 stacks, or 5 stacks, this just shows how much more healing you can do with this talent. So for instance, if we look at the baseline healing for Whitemane's plea at level 4, it's 164 healing. But if we compare the amount of healing we do at level 4 without any Zeals, and just Martyrdom, it increases to 213 healing at level 4. And that's through the 30% increase by just taking the talent. And we can see that that moves up Whitemane's total healing from 10% to 13%, because again, it's a 30% increase. And this further increases to 14%, to 15%, to 16%, and to 17% with respect to the additional Zeals you put out. So this should make sense, and it really does increase your out-of-combat heals. And at this point, I'll just walk you through a quick rotation of how you can maximize the amount of Zeals you have out to increase your plea healing and still be mana efficient. So here's what the rotations look like. There's the direct healing rotations and the indirect healing rotations. So now I'm going to demonstrate these rotations and show you how to do them. So to begin healing with Whitemane, we have to keep in mind our Martyrdom talent and also our Desperation Debuff. So the foundation of what we're doing is to be mana efficient while still bolstering our healing output through direct heals in the form of plea. So for this first rotation, we want to apply Zeal. So we have the option of applying Zeal through either Clemency or plea. So we're going to start with opening our rotation with plea first because it allows us to follow it with Clemency. And the reason we want to follow it with Clemency is because it removes that Desperation Debuff attached to casting plea. So the rotation will be Q, Clemency, Q. So that will cost a total of 80 mana. And the reason we're casting a Q at the end is because it's going to be an empowered Q because of Martyrdom by 50%. So this is your standard rotation and a rotation you should be well acquainted with. You'll be utilizing this sequence in nearly any Whitemane build that you play. And I should also note that you should still be casting your Searing Lash and weaving in your autos throughout all of these rotations as much as you can. So this rotation provides us with a foundation to tweak if we need. So if I want to heal myself as Whitemane, I can't cast Clemency on myself. So I'll need to cast Clemency on an ally to make the most use out of my Desperate Plea. So I'd cast Q on myself, Clemency on a nearby ally, instantly break that, and then cast Q on myself again. We're going to instantly break the Clemency because we don't really care to heal that ally because we're assuming they're at like 100% HP. We're using Clemency because it costs no mana and we're using it to apply an additional Zeal on that ally. And also removing a stack of Desperation, so our next plea will cost even less mana. So you'll cast Q for 40 mana, Clemency on an ally, so now you have 2 Zeals, and you removed a stack of Desperation, and then you cast Q again, which would be healing for 50% more than a baseline plea. But yeah, ultimately, once you understand the concept of managing your Desperation and understanding why we insert Clemency or Inquisition into the rotation, and seeing the outcome in the form of stronger Desperate Pleas through Martyrdom, Whitemane's rotations are basically just formulas that can be altered. And once you get the hang of Whitemane, you can see the inefficiencies of certain sequences and figure out some shortcuts to save mana. And just try your best not to panic and spam your pleas or freeze up and forget to apply any of your Zeals. So now we'll go back and look at the other talent that I take for my indirect healing build. And instead of Martyrdom, I take Unwavering Faith. And in principle, this works the exact same way with the rotations or whatever. It's about managing your Zeals, but instead of empowering your plea, Whitemane's auto attacks get empowered. So by taking this talent, your attack range is increased, and for every Zeal you have active, it increases your auto attack damage by 20%. So at this point, I'll just put a quick graph showing that. So when deciding between Martyrdom or Unwavering Faith, I typically just look at the comp and the map. If I feel like the enemy team has a lot of melees and bruisers and people that I can safely poke with my autos, I tend to go with Unwavering Faith. And if the enemy team has a lot of poke, like a Lunara or Li Ming or Gul'dan, then I definitely have to take Martyrdom because that allows me to heal out of combat, and against a poke comp, I'm not gonna be able to out heal their poke through my autos and Searing Lash. So it's best if I just heal my team from my backline and not take unnecessary poke damage. As far as maps are concerned, I mean, there's some maps I typically don't enjoy playing Whitemane on, and that includes Ultric Pass and Inferno Shrines. Any map, or even BOE, maps like that, like I get really annoyed when my team splits, and on those maps it's kind of encouraged for your team to split up a lot. So it's just a bit too tedious and annoying for me, so I typically don't play a Whitemane on those maps, period. But maps where I like playing Whitemane include like Tomb of the Spider Queen, and Dragonshire is definitely my favorite, and Towers of Doom. So on maps like that, it really just comes down to assessing the comp and seeing what build would make more sense. Moving on, for level 7, I just take Cleanse, pretty straightforward. If for some reason I'm not taking Cleanse, I will take Zealous Spirit for the direct healing build, and Saintly Greatstaff for the indirect healing build. But 99% of the time you're going to take Cleanse, and that's just kind of standard for healers, because if you don't take Cleanse, you're kind of trolling just a little bit. So now we have to pick a Whitemane's alt. So for both my direct and indirect healing build, I prefer Scarlet Aegis, although I will say both of these alts are really good. So Scarlet Aegis is like an AoE heal. It gives everyone affected a stack of Zeal and 40 armor, as well as just a direct heal of like 300. So this is a really good alt to take against a comp that has strong engages and burst. So for instance, if you can predict a Sonya leap or an Anub engage or something like that, it's really good and really strong. And it's also really good to use just like during a team fight as well, because you're giving everybody 40 armor and a stack of Zeal. So that just amplifies your healing so much through your level 4s, and just like immediately having everyone pre-Zealed. So you can instantly cast Searing Lash and Inquisition and just do so much healing, and it's just really powerful. And Scarlet Aegis is really good because it pairs nicely with Whitemane's active trait, which was the spell power. So you'd want to press your press D and then you'd press your alt, and that's a really good combo. And then for Divine Reckoning, it's also like a really good alt. It's really good for zone control, and it's a great way to get mana back as well. If you're able to pull off a really good Divine Reckoning, it's like one of the most funny alts in the game because like no one dies and it's kind of hilarious. But for the most part, this alt kind of is not that reliable, and most of the times it's a flop. So I typically prefer Scarlet Aegis just because it's a shorter cooldown and there's more synergies with other talents. And Divine Reckoning is more of like, honestly, I want to say kind of like a gimmicky alt. Like it's really good against like point control, and really good if you can combo with an ally like Maiev Cage or Falstead or ETC or something like that, or a Zeratul. But for the most part, I don't know, I just don't like the way it feels, and it kind of doesn't synergize with my gameplay style. And not to mention, when comparing the heroic versions, like your level 20, it's not even comparable. So for Heroic Divine Reckoning basically just deals more damage and pulls everyone to the center. Whereas the heroic version of Scarlet Aegis, it heals for 50% more and it makes everybody unstoppable for 2 seconds. I think that's insane, especially at level 20, because a lot of the times the cleanses and unstoppables are the difference between winning and losing a team fight. I love using Scarlet Crusade versus Sonya Leaps and Falstad Gust and anything else, a Deckard. It's just amazing. It's so powerful, it's so strong. And it was kind of a close choice between the level 10s, but at 20, like, it's not even comparable in my opinion. I would say that this is one of my favorite ults in the game. It's just so powerful. Moving on to level 13, for the direct healing build, we'll take Subjugation. And for the indirect healing build, we're going to take Lashing Out. So Subjugation makes it so that Whitemane's Inquisition now shrinks enemies, making them do 50% less damage. So this is a really powerful spell, and not many heroes have the shrink ability. I know that Whitemane has it, Alexstrasza has it, and I believe Tyrande has it, and I think that's everybody. But the shrink ability is really powerful because it reduces the enemy's total damage, and this is really powerful in skirmishes, because Whitemane can basically turn any skirmish in her favor by reducing the enemy's damage output by 50%. And while this is happening, while they're being subjugated, Whitemane is able to still deal Inquisition damage, so she's still doing indirect heals while making the enemy do less damage. So it's really powerful and allows Whitemane to get the upper hand in these skirmishes. And for the indirect healing build, Whitemane will take Lashing Out. So this talent is really strong and it really shines in moments where the enemy team is grouped up. You want to try to land your Searing Lash, and the second strike, if you land it, it reduces the cooldown of Searing Lash to 1 second. So what this talent does is allows you the potential to just spam Searing Lash on a 1 second cooldown. And this is great for a couple reasons, because first, having more damage output through indirect heals is just great because that's just more healing. And also, Lashing Out pairs very nicely with Pity the Frail, because every enemy hit by Pity the Frail reduces the cooldown of Inquisition and Clemency by 1.5 seconds. So Lashing Out pairs nicely with the pre-existing talents we've taken, and it also allows Whitemane to just increase her overall indirect healing damage. For level 16, for the direct healing build, we're going to take Shared Punishment. So this talent is really good with Subjugation, because now Whitemane can actually subjugate 2 enemies with the cost of 1 Inquisition. So when Whitemane casts Inquisition on an enemy, it chains out and can spread to another enemy, and now both of them have their damage reduced by 50%, and Whitemane is getting more heals out from her Inquisition. Another part of Shared Punishment is it affects Whitemane's Clemency as well. So if Whitemane casts Clemency on an ally and that ally is next to an enemy, the Clemency will chain out as an Inquisition to subjugate an enemy. So Shared Punishment just really makes your Inquisition and Clemency really powerful. There's more direct heals, there's less damage from the enemy team. It's just super powerful and one of my favorite talents. And for the indirect healing build, we can also take Shared Punishment just because it pairs nicely with Lashing Out and Pity the Frail, so that's an option. And I forgot to mention that Shared Punishment also reduces the armor of enemies by 10, which is really nice. In either build, Shared Punishment is fine to take, but you can also take Harsh Discipline for the indirect healing build. This ability allows you to root enemies. Personally, it seems really good on paper, but for me personally, I don't really like it that much just because it alters my healing rotation to be used as a form of CC rather than what I like to use it as, which would be like indirect heals, direct heals are a way to remove a desperation stack. This adds one more variable and it just gets too much for me, so I mean, if I have to take it, I would take it against a Tracer or something like that, a Tracer or a Genji. Although Shared Punishment and Subjugation are very good against like the Zeratul, Genjis, Lunaras, like the annoying heroes, It's really good versus them, especially if you can cast Clemency on like your dive tank and it automatically chains to like a Lunar or something. That's really satisfying, and it really shuts down the enemy DPS. And especially enemy DPS who want to dive you, it's extremely good versus dive comps, because you'll just cast your ult, Scarlet Aegis, drop your E, and then just cast Inquisition on them and they can't do anything. Because now you have 40 armor and they're doing 50% less damage, and your heals are still so strong, and if you accidentally get low, you have Pity the Frail. You're just so strong at 16, it's actually insane. So at level 20, it's pretty straightforward. If you took Scarlet Aegis, take Scarlet Crusade. If you took Divine Reckoning, Judgment Day or Purge the Wicked are pretty good options. You typically aren't going to take Guiding Light. I can only think of like a few times I've ever taken this talent, and it was out of pure frustration. Like if I had an ally who would just like not come to me for heals, I would literally just take this talent just so I wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. But under ideal circumstances, you don't want to take Guiding Light, because these heroics are much better, especially Scarlet Crusade. This is the best talent ever. So yeah, that would conclude the direct healing build and the indirect healing build. Thank you for watching, and if you made it by the end of this video, if you have any further questions or any confusion or something you'd like to add to the video, feel free to post about it in the comment section. And I'll be sure to be reading all the comments, especially the questions, and I'll try my best to get to all of them. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully you learned something. And yeah, I'm happy to see more Whitemane players, so hopefully we get some new ones out of this video.